Welcome to the Voice of the Beginning, the Word of the Bible. Before we begin, help us spread the word. Subscribe to the channel, like, comment, and share with those you love.
Dear friends and seekers of truth, today we begin a profound journey, unraveling ancient mysteries that speak to us about the origin of evil and the unwavering divine fidelity. We return to the dawn of time, to the age of innocence, the period when the cosmos was in perfect order, and the earth was a pure reflection of the Creator's plan. We contemplate the time of primordial harmony. In the heavens, there existed beings of light and power, of an indescribable glory, the Watchers, also known in some traditions as the egregoroi, or the Iron. They were not mere executors, but rather sacred sentinels, angels entrusted with a mission of supreme importance, to observe and protect young humanity and the earth, maintaining divine order and balance. They were created to be mirrors of order and righteousness. In the Book of Enoch, these beings are presented in their position of honor, enjoying proximity to the throne. Their purpose was worship and attentive vigilance. But this vigilance, over time, opened the doors to a terrible temptation. The purity of the celestial vision began to cloud. Instead of contemplating the glory of the Creator, who is the source of all true beauty, their eyes became fixed on earthly beauty, on the fragility and comeliness of the daughters of men. What should have been an object of observation and protection became a focus of forbidden desire. It was not merely attraction, but the will to possess, to descend, and to mix the sacred with the profane. This was a fissure in the celestial order, a seed of rebellion that began to grow in the hearts of these angels. They gathered and, in a conspiracy that defied the Creator himself, sealed a pact. Led by Semyaza, the chief of the Watchers, and the powerful Azazel, who would become the greatest corrupter, they uttered a profane oath on the summit of Mount Hermon. They would descend to earth, violating their post, to take wives and generate a new lineage. They swore that if any of them wavered, the punishment would fall upon all. This act of disobedience, of abandoning their own angelic nature, is the cosmic turning point that precipitated chaos. The seed of rebellion they planted echoes in the Bible itself, in Genesis chapter 6, verses 1 and 2, which tells us concisely, "And it came to pass when men began to multiply on the face of the earth, and daughters were born unto them, that the sons of God saw the daughters of men that they were fair, and they took them wives of all which they chose." The Book of Enoch reveals to us that behind the simplicity of this biblical mention was the magnitude of a great betrayal of the divine plan, an event that contaminated the purity of creation. The descent materialized. There were 200 celestial beings, whose glory became stained upon touching the earthly ground. Their footsteps brought not only the profane union, but a true avalanche of corruption that swept away the innocence of young humanity. Among them, Azazel stood out nefariously, not just as a seducer, but as the true master of deception and degradation. He was not satisfied with simple carnal transgression, with abandoning his post. He sought above all to corrupt the very soul of humanity through the distribution of forbidden knowledge, secrets that should have been reserved for the celestial kingdom. It was Azazel who tore the veil of purity, teaching men the art of metallurgy, the forging of swords, shields, knives, and breastplates. He introduced war and organized violence to the earth, transforming the use of iron from a tool of creation into an instrument of destruction. Iron, which once lay hidden, became the emblem of conflict and death. But his corruption did not stop on the battlefield. Azazel also revealed the secrets of seduction, cosmetics, precious stone adornments, and techniques for artificial beautification. He fostered vanity, artifice, and seduction that diverted the heart from simplicity and purity. Women were taught to adorn themselves for deception, and men to covet appearance over essence. Beyond war and vanity, he taught magic, enchantments, astrology, and spells, perverting the natural search for God into empty and wicked rituals. This explosion of impure and unbalanced knowledge rapidly contaminated humanity in all its aspects. The innocence of the beginning of creation was replaced by a vicious cycle of uncontrolled lust, rampant violence, and self-deception. The earth, which God had created to be a garden, a dwelling of peace, quickly transformed into a battlefield and a place of ostentation. This vast proliferation of evil is the deepest explanation for the realization we read in Genesis chapter 6, verse 5, where the Creator himself observes with pain, "And God saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every imagination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually." The corruption taught by these rebellious angels drastically accelerated humanity's distance from the Creator. From this profane marriage between fallen light and earthly flesh, the greatest of abominations and the catalyst for the coming judgment was born: the Nephilim, the giants. They were more than mere large men. They were hybrid beings, born of the union of the celestial and the terrestrial, possessing immeasurable strength, but without the divine soul to guide it. Their very existence was a cosmic imbalance, a stain on the perfection of creation. The Nephilim were of colossal stature and, even more terrifying, possessed an insatiable appetite. Initially, they consumed all the provisions humanity could offer, depleting the harvests and the flocks. But the hunger within them was not just physical, it was a spiritual hunger, a thirst for power and destruction. The brute force that Azazel had indirectly bequeathed to them propelled them toward increasingly darker acts. The Book of Enoch narrates the horror to us. When food became scarce, they did not hesitate to turn against life itself. They devoured the clean and unclean animals and ultimately turned against one another and even against men, their own human fathers. The violence reached an unbearable peak. The earth was flooded with blood, not just from war, but from a cannibalism that dismantled all morality and order. Human life was consumed by the fury of these giants, and nature itself groaned under the weight of this iniquity. The suffering of the few righteous and the cry of the polluted earth ascended to heaven like incense, a plea for intervention. Creation as a whole cried out to the Creator for justice. The Book of Enoch gives voice to this suffering earth, which could no longer bear the weight of the profanation. All of this provides us with the complete dimension behind the brief mention in Genesis chapter 6, verse 4. There were giants, Nephilim, in the earth in those days, and also after that, when the sons of God came in unto the daughters of men, and they bare children to them, the same became mighty men which were of old, men of renown. They were men of fame and legendary power, but it was a fame stained by blood and oppression, representing power without morality, the brute force that turned against life and against its own purpose, making the divine judgment inevitable. Amidst the chaos, hope manifested itself. The Creator, in his infinite justice and hearing the piercing cry of his wounded creation, did not remain inactive. The rebellion of the Watchers and the tyranny of the Nephilim demanded a response that would re-establish cosmic order. It was at this dramatic moment that the four great archangels, Michael, the warrior prince, Gabriel, the messenger, Raphael, the healer, and Uriel, the watcher, presented Earth's supplication to the throne of glory. They interceded on behalf of the oppressed humanity and the corrupted creation, testifying to the evil that had multiplied. The divine sentence was then decreed. The earth would be purified by a great deluge, and the Watchers, those celestial traitors, would be punished with eternal imprisonment. God's justice, though slow in human eyes, is always certain and unchangeable. But before the judgment of water fell, the Lord chose an instrument of flesh and blood to confront the fallen beings of light: Enoch, Noah's grandfather. The choice of Enoch is profoundly significant, as he was a man who already walked in intimate and constant communion with God, standing out amidst the wickedness of his generation. Enoch was taken in vision and in spirit to the celestial courts, where he witnessed God's glory and received revelations about the future and, more importantly, the terrible mission of prophesying punishment to the fallen angels. Imagine the grandeur of this scene. A mortal, the most righteous man on earth, returning from his ascension to confront the powerful, rebellious angels, speaking with the authority of the Most High. Enoch fulfilled his mission, conveying the sentence of confinement and condemnation to Semiaza and his companions, revealing that their rebellion would result in their imprisonment in darkness, without prospect of pardon. His life of unconditional fidelity is the most eloquent contrast to the disobedience and fall of the angels. It is because of this unique relationship that the Bible records in Genesis chapter 5, verse 24, "And Enoch walked with God, and he was not, for God took him." This taking, or rapture, is the maximum testament to obedience. According to the Book of Enoch, it was not a mere end of life, but the reception of divine wisdom and the opportunity to witness the truth. The story of Enoch proves that true ascension is not achieved by stolen forbidden knowledge, like Azazel's, but rather by the humility of obedience and intimate walking with the Creator. Once Enoch's prophecy was fulfilled, the judgment began with the exemplary punishment of the principal leader of corruption, the one who had most defiled the human soul, Azazel. His condemnation was not just an exile, but an act of symbolic annihilation of his glory. The Archangel Raphael, the healer and bearer of justice, received the divine command to specifically deal with him. Azazel was seized, bound with eternal chains, and in an act of supreme dishonor, was stripped of all his celestial garments and the power he once possessed. The angel who taught vanity and war was now divested of his majesty and power. His confinement was established in the darkness of the desert, in a place of terror and isolation called Dudael. This is no ordinary place. It is an abyss, a prison beneath the rocks, a location of total desolation. The text describes that Azazel was covered with rough stones and cast into the darkness, and there he was to remain, in perpetual suffering and isolation, until the great day of judgment. His imprisonment, before the flood, symbolized the immediate power of divine justice over evil, and served as the removal of the primary source of corruption from the earth, so that purification could take place. But this punishment, which resonates in other traditions, sheds an unexpected and profound light on one of the most mysterious rituals of the Old Testament, the Day of Atonement, Yom Kippur. Leviticus chapter 16, we read about the ritual of the two goats, one for the Lord, and the other, enigmatically, for Azazel. The high priest symbolically transferred all the sins of the people onto this latter goat, which was then sent alive into the desert, to the figure of the banished one. Herein lies the depth of the revelation in the Book of Enoch. The scapegoat was not sent to an empty place or a random location. It was sent to the demonic figure or evil spirit that is Azazel himself, to his place of imprisonment. This ritual for the ancients represented the final transference of guilt and sin to its origin, to where corruption must be banished and confined. Azazel is therefore the archetype of the banished one, the carrier of the sin of angelic disobedience, and his imprisonment is the promise that evil has a reserved destiny, and that divine justice will eventually prevail over all the darkness he taught. While Azazel and the Watcher leaders were confined in the darkness beneath the rocks, the final sentence for the corrupt world was imminent. The Creator had established that the only way to eradicate the abomination and rampant violence was through a total purification. The Archangel Uriel warned Noah about the flood, the great act of washing the world that would erase the stain from the face of the earth, preserving only the justice embodied in the righteous man and his family. The colossal and violent bodies of the Nephilim were, in fact, destroyed by the overwhelming waters. However, the story of evil did not end there. The Book of Enoch reveals a terrible truth about the nature of these beings. Their spirits, being hybrids of angelic essence, immortal and celestial, and human essence, terrestrial and carnal, could not simply be annihilated. They were a spiritual abomination. Following the violent death of their physical bodies, these spirits were released into the terrestrial plane, without a body to inhabit, and without a place of rest in the divine plan. They went out to wander, becoming the evil spirits, what traditions call demons. They are, in essence, the walking legacy of Azazel's rebellion and the corruption of the Watchers, tormenting and afflicting humanity, continuing to sow discord and sin until the day of judgment. It is for this reason, recognizing this ancient and powerful tradition of Enoch, that the New Testament speaks about the destiny and punishment of the fallen angels, confirming the truth of the narrative. In 2 Peter chapter 2, verse 4, we read, "For if God spared not the angels that sinned, but cast them down to hell and delivered them into chains of darkness, to be reserved unto judgment." And in Jude chapter 1, verse 6, we are reminded of the angels who kept not their first estate, but left their own habitation, and the Lord hath reserved in everlasting chains under darkness unto the judgment of the great day. The Tartarus mentioned by Peter is the deep abyss, the very place of confinement for the watchers described in detail in the Book of Enoch. These passages show that the angelic rebellion is an enduring spiritual truth, and that God's justice is not only immediate, as in the flood and the imprisonment of Azazel, but also reserved and definitive for the end of time. Evil, even while it walks on earth, has its origin and its final destiny sealed by the judgment. And so, we close the cycle of the fall of the Watchers. But what is the eternal message that the story of Azazel and his companions delivers to us, spanning millennia of history? It is a powerful and solemn lesson about the abuse of freedom. If beings of celestial nature imbued with light and power could fall from their exalted position by yielding to worldly desires, uncontrolled lust, power without ethics forbidden, and selfish knowledge, how much more should we fragile and terrestrial beings be vigilant? The fall of the angels is an perennial warning. True corruption is not primarily outside of us, but resides in the choice to divert our focus from the Creator toward the ephemeral glare of vanity, violence, and deception. They had heaven, but they chose earth. The contrast is manifested in the figure of Enoch. While the Watchers descended and were lost in chaos, Enoch was elevated through fidelity. He shows us the opposite path. Amidst the whirlwind of iniquity and evil, it is entirely possible to walk in communion with God and be rewarded and uplifted by that loyalty. The wisdom that truly matters for eternal life is not the one Azazel taught, which led to self-destruction, but rather the intimate knowledge of the divine will and the practice of righteousness. Finally, the story comforts us with the unwavering promise that the final judgment will come, and all injustice perpetrated, whether by the fallen angels or by men, will be corrected under the divine balance. While we await that day, we are called to constant vigilance and loving obedience. May the story of Azazel and the fallen angels inspire us to honor the sanctity of our own nature, to reject the seductive corruption of the world, and to seek the light of truth that guides us back not to the abyss, but to the return to the Creator. The choice, friends, is ours.
May this word take root in your spirit and guide your steps. If this message spoke to you, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe.